Hey everybody. So y'all are getting a as much of a live reaction as you'll probably get, okay, to the FX Hulu series Kindred, which I told y'all some months ago when I started my channel, like Afrofuturism is my thing, and the godmother of Afrofuturism, none other than Octavia E. Butler, who passed away in 2006. But she published this book originally in 1979, and it is everything. And I am not here. This FX Hulu first episode, Dana, I got things to say about it. Okay, I have some things to say about it. All right, now I'll be honest. It did keep my interest, but it kept my interest because as someone who has read this book, um, and not only read it but taught it to students, I know it pretty well. Okay, so they are clearly trying to modernize the story. Like I said, Kindred originally took place in like 76 or so. It was published in 79, but I'm saying like the actual story. But it took place in the 70s. All right. So this updated version, the woman has Dana, who's about 26 in the story. She has an iPhone, a Mac. Okay. All right, I could let that go. I understand Hollywood to some extent. Hollywood gets on my nerves, but nevertheless. All right. And she wakes up. She wakes up with bruises and whip marks from a beating. You can tell that she's been hurt just she's on the floor in her home. Now, originally in the story, we are introduced to Dana Franklin, okay? But for some reason, initially, Hulu FX decided to change her name to Dana James, which I was like, what the fuck? What the fuck is the point? I slowly got the point, even though I think the point is bullshit. But anyway, originally Dana Franklin, or Dana James in this case, was in an emergency room of a hospital, and the doctors and nurses are asking her what happened. They're suspicious of her husband, whose name is Kevin Franklin, and they're asking her these probing questions in the book to see if she has been physically abused by her husband, because that was the only one of the ways that made sense to these doctors, how she had these whipping marks. Of course, she's being taken in and out of history, right? Instead, though, in this FX Hulu first episode, we get this scene where she is lying on the floor of her new house that she moved into. The house was a new one for Dana and Kevin, her husband, in the book. And she's screaming for Kevin, her husband, who was her husband in the book, but he's not her husband in this episode. Okay? So her white neighbor has basically called the police because they hear her screaming, you know, um, in an attempt to check on her. So she just moved there in the neighborhood. How does the neighbor know her so well to check on her? I don't know. Okay, but it's a white woman in her robe out there with the police. The police are yelling and banging on her door, trying to get her to come out, saying, "Hey, you don't have to let us in, but you should come out here and talk to us. We're just concerned." Um, and what it was giving was the police are continuing to bang on her door at the concern of this white woman neighbor's call, um, which was giving white people an opportunity to appear as a savior, as because that's not old and a bad trope at this point. And provide Dana a lack of agency in the story where she is indeed and purposely and intentionally and by no accident the black female protagonist, star of the story Kindred in fiction, is now being lent to, like, this white woman is trying to help her, so on and so forth, and it's annoying. Okay, that part already had pissed me off because Octavia Butler creates these characters of strong black women who do these things in the science fiction realm, but they're the protagonists and they just are. And that's what makes it so powerful. So anyway, she meets up with her aunt and uncle at a restaurant. Okay? Now, in the book, Dana doesn't have a mother and a father. They died when she was young, but she has extended family, and her husband Kevin in the book also has a family, but his family rejects their marriage because she's black and he's white. And her family, her extended family, because her parents have passed, don't really care for the fact that she married a white man, so on and so forth. But the scene at the restaurant is giving us her extended family intro. All right? So she meets up with her aunt and uncle at a restaurant. The uncle is a black male. His name is Alan. And this uncle is hostile toward her being late, because they can't help but depict a black man who is asking her questions about how much she sold her brownstone for. This was stupid. This is foolish. Whatever. Because it would only make sense to have a black man in a hostile position if he was going to have shown any sort of, or be any sort of father figure in her life. Okay? That shit's annoying. So in the book, her and Kevin actually meet at a warehouse where they're both working, and they eventually start dating, and they are married. They are married when we meet them in the story. Okay? Now, both of them were aspiring writers in the book. Both of them are people who are creative, so on and so forth, and they bought a new house together as a married couple. All right? Now, fun fact, the way Hulu FX wants to tell it, they have Dana selling a brownstone priced, on the books for $2 million in New York, and she decides to move to Los Angeles, sells it, buys a house, and has some extra money. Okay, and the brownstone had belonged to the grandmother, and because she was had lost with her parents, essentially the grandmother, had left this great brownstone to her, and they're gentrifying Brooklyn, whatever. Um, that was never part of the story. Mm-mm. And most of Octavia Butler's books don't do anything like that. Why? Because, in fact, as a person, Octavia Butler, who grew up in Pasadena, California, which is a much blacker area outside of Los Angeles, many of her stories are placed in California because that is the place she knows best. Okay, this was so unnecessary. I get they're trying to modernize it, but just y'all could have done Baldwin Hills or something. Just miss me. All right. Instead of meeting her husband in the warehouse where they both work and keeping the story in Los Angeles, she instead has been in LA for 2 days, has bought a home, and Kevin is the waiter who observes her dysfunctional family meeting at this restaurant. And she loses the charge on her phone. Her aunt and uncle leave. For some reason, don't ask her how she's going to get home, knowing she has no ability to drive because apparently she grew up in New York, even though that never happened in the story. And her phone needs a charge, so she goes up to the bar as opposed to like running after her aunt and uncle who didn't think to even offer her a ride home. That miss me, miss me. Okay, so she goes up to the bar, asks for a charger, and they were like, "We don't do that here." Now Kevin, the waiter, is apparently off his shift and things are clearing out, and says, "Well, I could give you a charger. You can borrow mine, but it's in my car." So she gives him like a look, whatever. And he was like, but it would actually be faster for me just to take you home instead of you getting a charger to charge your phone to find another stranger to come and pick you up. Boom, boom, psh. Yeah, actually, kind of true though. Okay, now, her and Kevin are already married in the story. They're not shacking up like they will eventually be in this episode. So, once again, another white person coming to the rescue, albeit small. It it's these constant acts of white people showing up to help Dana and save Dana. And somebody's probably like, well, what's the big deal? I'm going to tell you what the big deal is. The difference with Kindred as a book was that it showed how white people in situations, particularly ones that are racist, including her husband, would be corrupted by the system of slavery, not come to her defense if it meant protecting themselves first. And it showed the dynamics of race and racism in a way that people were not used to seeing depicted in books or movies or anywhere else. And it obscures the original work by giving these white people so much leverage to be they're better, they're good. And this is a harsh work of fiction that is rooted in historical facts. As somebody with a PhD in history, I feel like I can say that. So anyway, okay, so then her aunt, after they have this contentious dinner, comes to visit her new house, and says after selling the brownstone, she looks at Dana and says, "You must have some money left over because this is a lot of house for one person." So I feel like there was an attempt to give, by the writers, Dana agency by showing that she bought a house on her own as a black woman without a white man the way it was in the story. And she's able to live as a creative writer because she's hoping to write for television and live off that leftover money till she gets her big break, right? Which is a typical LA story. However, Dana already had agency and supernatural abilities in Kindred, okay? They actually didn't have to try to make her this black woman who's going to be a creative, make money. She doesn't need a husband. It felt like that was what they were trying to do by giving her agency. Actually, Octavia Butler already took care of that bill through this book, so you need not reinvent the wheel. It's paid, bought and paid for, okay? All right. Now, she has an awful argument with her aunt where her aunt accuses her of being unstable, like her mother and her uncle, which was the aunt's brother. And she clearly has a dysfunctional relationship with them. She's kind of the oddball out. She doesn't have parents, but she still wants to have family. And then her aunt leaves the house in a huff. She's going to her job at the hospital, I guess as a nurse. And then she calls Kevin the waiter who dropped her off instead of her aunt and uncle. And then they go to hang out after that. Once again, this white man swoops in to save her, who she doesn't know, who took her home last night, right after her dysfunctional argument with her black family plays out, in a way that is completely foreign to the original plot. That did not go down in that book. Okay? Now, I'm not talking about like an updated version. That shit didn't happen. This argument with this aunt didn't happen. All right, so then, of course, the white guy who helps her get home from the restaurant now takes her shopping for groceries and a mattress, and she spends about $7,000 on this mattress, and he's just sitting there like, wow. And he helps her bring it back home and sets it up. And she tries to offer him gas money when they were in the car and just says, he wouldn't take any form of payment or anything for her to take him out to, like get something to eat. But, he helps her bring all her stuff in. But she seduces him, essentially, because she initiates the sex. Because that isn't an old trope that we've seen since, I don't know, Birth of a Nation. Was that 1915? Yeah. Okay. Because white men are so respectful and self-respecting, the perpetual gentleman. And it's the black woman who always wants to have sex with him. And he would never initiate that. And he's just such a gentleman. Which is a stereotype from slavery, which was not true. That's why black women were regularly sexually assaulted. That's why black people are an array of colors now, and it was not by choice on black women's part. Okay? So, that being a trope from slavery, and we are supposed to be in technically 2016, it's some bullshit. It's not working for me. Okay? This is exactly what Kindred was designed to transcend. Like I said, this is historical fiction. There's a difference. As you'll see, I'm taking this personally. Okay. So she wakes up after giving, so 30 minutes into the first episode, we finally get to the first scene of the actual book where Dana meets Rufus. Rufus is a part of the huge slave-owning family in Maryland where her ancestors were from. And he's a little boy at this point. But this is how the book starts. She saves him from like falling in a river, and she gives him CPR, which is obviously a medical ability that was not commonly used or known, if at all, in the 19th century. But she's pulled back into history, right? So she wakes up after she gives Rufus CPR and brings life back into him. And his white mother is like fighting her off. She's never seen her before. Says, you're trying to kill my son. Next thing you know, Tom Whalen, at least his name is Tom Whalen to me so far, because I know the book. So he's Tom for now, until I guess they decide they want to change it. Anyway, so Tom Whalen points a shotgun at her for even being near his son and not being one of his slaves. All right, but she wakes up. And then her nosy ass white neighbors, this time the white woman and her husband, all right, come over to the house, knocking on the door saying, we heard screaming. And Kevin, who happens to open the door, says, oh yeah, I'm her friend or whatever. And they start questioning him like, who are you? And who, what are you talking about? You're Dana's friend. Who is Dana? And he was like, she lives here. And it's basically just some Karen shit. But Dana comes to the door, basically says, look, I'm fine. I was just having a nightmare or whatever. Um, and so these white people are at her door again, trying to say, well, this is a family place, this, that, and the other. Like, how the fuck you show up at somebody else's door questioning them about why they there when they open the door? And this ain't your house. Like, it's just, I just feel like white people cannot help themselves. White people in Hollywood cannot help but to depict certain bullshit. All right. So anyway, and black white people too, and you know what I mean by that. So Kevin, who's still there, her knight in shining armor, who was her waiter at the restaurant, who became her unpaid Uber driver and grocery person, and who she seduces, who's still at her home. He starts to look up her symptoms and says that maybe she was sleepwalking. And she was like, you know what? The other night when this happened, I thought maybe I was sleepwalking. And he's, like Googling this shit. And he's like, this is caused by stress. Sleepwalking is caused by stress, sleep deprivation, and sometimes travel. And so she says, well, I have been stressed. And he makes this little comment like, oh, has stress made my little princess a sleepwalker? And she just like has this fit. Like, why would you say that? Because her aunt had called her a princess earlier, for, basically trying to act like what her aunt felt like was spending a lot of money that she really doesn't have or whatever. And she was like, why would you say that? And he says, well, I just watched you drop like several G's on, a few things today, including a mattress. And it's not a bad thing to have money. Um, and she basically kicks Kevin out, or, says for him to get out for calling her a princess. Okay. I'm gonna tell you what that was given. It was given real Housewives of Potomac vibes when Candace first came on the scene and started crying about Chris Bassett calling her a princess. And the rest of us initially were under the impression that he must have called her the N word or the B word or something along those lines to have her crying like that. It was given that kind of ridiculousness. Once again, these sort of things that people just throw in real classic black literature. And granted, Hollywood destroys a lot of things. The difference is black people don't get an array of films despite the array of work that we have. And so it's important for it to be depicted in a certain way. Anyway, so she's having this fit. She's kicking Kevin out. Yeah, because Candace started crying about how kids had teased her or whatever for being rich. How they teased her at private school for being rich. Okay, girl. Anyway, but Candace ain't a part of the story. But that's what it was given. Like that reality TV show, Black Girl, whatever they think, whatever. Okay, so then she disappears out of nowhere. She just disappears. She disappears, though, because she's saving Rufus again. And see, these are the kind of back and forth that happen in the book. They sound weird in this review because TV took over. So she saves him multiple times in the book. And he starts saying some things that would have been reminiscent of his lines in the book. But he calls her Negro. And so she goes, what? What did you say? Okay. So in the book, he clearly and regularly calls her the N word. I mean, like, not the N word, like the whole word, right? Which is why it surprised her in the book, right? Because this is the 70s that Octavia Butler is writing it. And in writing it, Octavia Butler is, really a part of that movement where black people aren't letting you talk to them the way you once did. Or, they're fighting back in a way they, hadn't before, not in mass at least. So in the book, she corrects him over and over again about calling her the N word and making him say Negro or black because it was the 1970s, right? Um, that was more appropriate, right? But once again, this is 19th century, so they're using these derogatory terms for black people so freely. But by replacing it with the word Negro instead of nigger, which is the word used in the book, it it does a disservice to the story because once again with the historical fiction, the goal was to demonstrate how terrible slavery was and what it was like to live in those situations. And that book is so well written that you feel like you're there. And so by saying that, it takes away from the power of that negative experience that she's trying to depict. It was kind of like when they did Their Eyes Watching God, which I'm not, Their Eyes Watching God, and they said, oh, women are the mule of the world, to avoid saying Negro women were the mule of the world, when Zora Neale Hurston's whole point was that black women are at the bottom. And she was articulating that. And when they took that out, they made it seem like this was, oh, just women in general. No, black women have a particular experience. We live it every day. Anyway, so the house slave, they have him named, I could have sworn they called him Tom. Now, I could be wrong. I really hope that they meant Tom Whalen and not Tom the slave, because I was like, in the book, the house slave's name was fucking Nigel. Nigel, okay? This is not Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, but I could have misheard that. I hope I'm wrong. So I was like, this is such a fuck shit white interpretation of black genius if they calling this man Tom. All right, and I have a problem with it. So she runs away. She gets mistaken for Hagar. Hagar in the book is Alice, and Alice is really her descendant from slavery that she actually meets, but she looks a whole lot like her, right? Who's around the same age. And that's how she starts to kind of understand this is her family. But Hagar is free. She's free with a cabin in the woods. She's not enslaved. How she becomes enslaved, well, that's part of the story. So then she meets Olivia. And Olivia, she kind of looks at, and they're supposed to kind of look alike, and they kind of do. But Olivia is an older version of, Alice. And it turns out that Olivia is her mother. Her mother, who has been stuck in the 19th century. Her mother, who's stuck in 1815. Even though Dana is in 2016 and keeps getting pulled back to the 19th century. This was not in the book. Her mother was dead. For real, for real. Her father was dead. For real, for real. Her parents were dead. They were gone. Now the mama is showing up as somebody who was supposed to be a descendant of slavery, who was enslaved regardless in the book. Dana was the only one that in future present time was a part of her family and not enslaved, okay? That's how the book was set up. So in the book, Dana witnesses an overseer's jealousy of Alice, who was free but in an intimate relationship with an enslaved black man. And that black man in the book actually fights that white man and tries to run away. Like, he kicks his ass. It's not just a bunch of black women getting slapped around by some white man, almost raped. Those images that we've seen over and over again. It's not to say those things didn't happen in enslavement, but in Kindred, the fact that a black man was defending a black woman in spite of his enslaved status, that shit was powerful and bold. Now, does he have to try to get away? Absolutely. Do they try to get away together? There's a lot that happens. And so by just having this scene with black women, no black male protection, when in the book that is intentionally there, and it shows the limits of that once again, but he didn't just take that shit, and black people were resistant all throughout slavery. So to me, it was just like, once again, it's taking away the agency that was intentionally and brilliantly depicted in the book. All right, so then Dana wakes up again from the situation. And Kevin, once again, and his white saviorness is right there as a white savior. Because if we were going to have a white rapist overseer abusing the black women he encounters as he travels in the night trying to get runaways, there always has to be a contrast with a good white person. Now, why do I have problems with this? Because white people in Hollywood, particularly in films with black people, can never appear as completely bad. They can't do it. But black people can be bad all throughout a movie. They can be prostitutes, they can be drug addicts, they can be unscrupulous businessmen, with no sense of conscience about how they treat other people, and we can go out any sort of positive characters. All right, but that can't happen with white people in Hollywood, even if it's a black story with a black female protagonist. Okay, that's why it bothers me. Which is why her aunt can have a contentious relationship with her 2 days after moving to her LA. Her black uncle is hostile toward her, but we have yet to see a black person, I don't know, just be simply nice to Dana. Hell, her mother has been alive but stuck in 1815. That is not part of the story. So instead of this being her going back into time to fix what happened to her family, which is essentially what Kindred does. And I really encourage y'all to read it, even if, I'm just going off right now, but I'm passionate about this. Um, to fix what happened to her family and avenge them of the evils of the Whalen family who owned her family in the 19th century. Her mother is actually alive and stuck in chattel slavery and is wondering, well, who's been raising you? And I was just like, y'all tried it. Y'all tried it. Hulu FX. And the reason why I was excited about this one, because it's one of my favorite books. I know Hollywood don't ever get it right, so I don't want nobody thinking like, oh, you expect too much out of Hollywood. But this book was so well done. You actually could have done this right. Two, FX, I honestly think, has done a good job in recent years of getting stories well done, i.e. Pose, all 3 seasons, as far as I'm concerned. The People versus O.J. Simpson, in terms of it just not being like, oh, O.J., like it was a complicated story, and they showed that. So I actually expected it, and I will say, I do think the actress is surprisingly good. The acting isn't nearly as bad as I actually thought it was going to be from some of the teasers. So I'll say that, but the story in and of itself and what it's depicting is just, it's not given. But it's because it's my favorite book. Even if I have to hate watch it, I'm gonna finish it. But I said, let me get on here and at least acknowledge it. So it premiered today. It started December 13th, and my students had to take their midterm. And I came home and I said, nope, I'm going to watch the first episode. So, yeah. So I'll give y'all some updates. But, hey, I think you should check it out. I would love for y'all to check it out and then tell me what y'all think. Because some people may come away with something completely different. I would love that. All right. I'll check on y'all later. Bye.